Thank you very much, Maretla. Thank you. I really would like to, first of all, thank Mark for initiating this conversation about this event and express my appreciation for what you're trying to do here. I'd like to acknowledge Mr. Matsatsi and very well put Mr. Matsatsi in terms of what the challenges are. Our Vice-Chancellor, Professor van Staden, thank you very much, sir. I really enjoyed the overview which you framed and the challenge which you put to the institution. I think that was entirely appropriate. So what I'm going to do, your colleagues, and I could either be long or short. So I'm going to try and put the provocation to you as crisply as I can and hand you back to Maretla. The major point that I'm going to be making to you is that we are in the depths of a long transition. That's the point. And I'm going to try and characterize what this transition is sociologically. So I'm not going to do an unpacking of what people are saying and where things are going and so on, but try to explain for us where it is that we are and what the implications of an understanding of where we are has for where we want to be. So we've spoken quite a lot already this morning about this future university. I'd like to sketch out for you what some of the implications are for trying to understand about how to get to that future. So if you forget anything, the one point that I'm going to be making is that we have gone through an incredible social revolution in the last 23 years. Not a political revolution, a social revolution. At the heart of that social revolution, and this is the key point, at the heart of that social revolution is that when we got to 1993, out of a population of about 45 million people, there were only something like 350,000. I'm putting the numbers correctly. I'm not. 350,000. And here's the drama, colleagues. There were only 350,000 people who were thought to be middle class in the African community. You want that to sink in? 350,000 out of 45 million people who were thought to be middle class in the African community. Absolutely extraordinary. Compared to what was happening in the white community, you had up to 80% of your community which had reached that stage as a result of 2 generations of affirmative action. What affirmative action had done for white people from about 1950 is produce middle-class comfort. Absolutely extraordinary. It's a post-war phenomenon that has happened in many parts of the world. It accelerated here so to the point that by the 1970s, the white middle class here in South Africa was the second most wealthy community in the world after the Californian middle class. Absolutely extraordinary. Compare that to 350,000 people who were middle class in the African community. And that middle classness was precarious. It was precarious precisely because African people could not bequeath to their children property. So you could not hand over to your children the benefits of buying a house, having investments in the same kind of way as this white middle class had done. So you have this extraordinary sociological phenomenon in South Africa that up to about 1993, actually it started changing a little earlier. Up to 1993, it was perfectly possible for a family to be middle class in one generation and working class in the next. To go up like that and bang, fall flat on the ground and have to rebuild all over again. I mean, this was the sociological quality of what it meant to be an African person in this country. So people who were colored, classified colored, and people who were classified Indian had it slightly better. It was better. They could buy property, they could institute and establish for themselves a track, a life track. It was not possible for African people. So here's the social revolution. Between 1993 and 2013, this African middle class increases either to 4 million or to 14 million. So we in sociology and economics are in a big debate about what has happened. And it's the least spoken of social reality in the way in which we come to speak about what's going on inside of the country. But it's the most almost significant thing that has happened since 1993. So we're in a debate about what do you count as middle class, and it's a wide, wide open debate. But even if you take the bottom end of that definition, it's an extraordinary shift from 350,000. Now, I bring you this here because it has deep, deep implications for what happens in the universities. This shift that happens socially in our broad society goes on to happen also in the universities. And it is fundamentally responsible for the challenges that we are seeing and experiencing right now. So in 1993, of the 470,000 students who were in the university system, 191,000 of them only were African. And the participation rate at that particular point was something like 12%. Come to 2015, we have almost 1 million students in the system. And the African absolute participation numbers, not rate, numbers have gone up to almost 800,000. So you're seeing a mirroring here of what has happened socially, happening inside of the university system. And it's a fundamental shift. And the point that I'm trying to make to you here is that with these numbers, with this composition of which I'm speaking here, you come to classify systems. You come to classify education systems. And I use the work of a man called Martin Trau. I've spoken to Mark about him. Now, this man, Martin Trau, you can go and Google him, is extremely useful for helping us understand what has happened in the country sociologically inside of the universities over this particular period of time. He makes the observation that systems tip over. Now, we've used this word massification in talking about the universities a lot over the last 10, 15 years. But we've never really come to terms with it. In coming to terms with it, we need to understand the tipping over. The system was, our higher education system, with these numbers of which I speak to you, was up until about 2012 an elite system. Martin Trau says the minute a system moves over the 16.1% number, when the proportion of your population participating in higher education moves over 16.1, you're in a completely different ball game. You're moving from what he calls an elite system to a mass system. So we've tipped over from 1993, with this increase in numbers, we've tipped over to becoming now what you might understand as a mass system. And we are experiencing, and this is an important thing for us to take note of, we're experiencing, as Martin Trau says, all the challenges that happen everywhere in the world where systems tip over from being elite to being mass. And the calming down point, which we need to be remembering for ourselves, is that systems elsewhere in the world, when they went through this moment of transition, went through immense difficulties. Systems elsewhere in the world where this has happened go through immense difficulties. And it's what those difficulties are and what they relate to that we need to understand. They relate to things like attitudes to access between an elite and a mass system, to what the function of the university is between an elite and a mass system, between the curriculum, what you teach in an elite system versus a mass system, what the institutional characteristics are between a mass and an elite system, where the locus of decision-making is in an elite system and in a mass system, and critically, how you come to understand standards between an elite system and a mass system. So the point I'm wanting to make to you is that since these numbers have gone this way, since this middle class, by the way, let me just make one point about this middle class. I should have said this earlier. This middle class is not yet a stabilized middle class, right? So even though these numbers have increased in the way in which they have, and even though people might have fridges and people might have TVs and dropping their children off in BMWs in their schools and so on, even though people are showing all of these attributes here now, they still don't have the full benefit of generations of middle-class life. No books in the houses. Really interesting. Don't take their children to all of these other things that established elites do. Take them on holidays to important cultural places, not even Mapungubwe, and they have real difficulty in being able to bring their lives, their home lives, in alignment with their children's school lives. So there's a disjuncture, even though they're middle class, there's a disjuncture between home and school. And you see this very clearly in all kinds of ways. But the point is that these are the young people coming into the universities, right? In this precarious middle class. They're coming into the universities, and the universities are having to learn how, in their new mass states, they should be managing and working with these students. Okay? So you can see really big challenges arising here. Big challenges, first of all, in how you deal with this question of admission. So if you're in an established middle-class environment where you have elite universities only, every middle-class person thinks that it's a right of birth that my child will go to university. From the minute that child is born, they're already saying that child is going to the University of Cape Town and is going to be in Smuts' house. Smuts is where that child is going to go. Okay? When you're in now a mass system, you no longer have those birthrights. Entry into the university is entirely dependent on how well you do in that examination, grade 12. Entirely. So this is the one change that happens. A big change that happens is around the curriculum. The curriculum in a university, and this has big implications for you folks here at TUT. The curriculum in an elite university is fundamentally, you think about the Oxford and Cambridge model, is fundamentally about character formation. I mean, that's what those universities are essentially for. You know, they operate on this one-to-one system. You have a tutor working with one student. So that tutor is, his or her job is entirely to make sure that this student is doing the right reading, the right number of hours, not drinking too much, preparing him or herself to govern. To govern. The curriculum in a mass system is fundamentally about preparing young people for the world of work. So we're in this job. And so here's a challenge to you. I mean, what should you be doing with your students? I mean, what is it? I mean, that's the challenge. What is it that you should be concentrating in your curriculum? And I dare say this, colleagues, I'm going to be very provocative. Most people are teaching what they learned in university. And they're teaching what they learned 15, 20 years ago. They're copying the notes from the lecturers that they got before. And it ain't good enough. It really is good enough. And so here's the moment of creativity. Here's what Professor van Staden was talking about. Here's your challenge. How do you now begin to develop a curriculum, and again I'm going to be provocative, which goes beyond decoloniality, beyond it, doesn't stay in it, doesn't stay in this self-absorbed thing, looking at your navel all the time, you know, which is fundamentally about thinking about solving problems. How do you develop a curriculum? Every single one of you as an academic, how do you develop a curriculum which is going to change these young people so fundamentally that they are completely different to the people that arrived here on the first day they came here? That when they leave here, they're not shy to say that I know about Newton's first law, and I know about the law of thermodynamics, and not embarrassed to be able to say that. There's no embarrassment, colleagues. There's no embarrassment to be educated. There's no embarrassment. There's no need to feel a sense of shame about being able to know about things. But they must also know how to solve that sewage problem in Khayelitsha. That's going beyond decolonization. They must be able to operate at these multiple levels, these levels of deep, if you like, sophistication about the cosmos and about my problems on the ground. And that sophistication, only you can begin to instill in them. The sense of deep, deep curiosity of something in this new elite, or moving from this elite in this mass system to something now which we are all in an experimental way going to be trying to put together. So we're in a different time and space, colleagues. We're in a completely different time and space. We're not, and I'll end there, we're not in the days of apartheid. We're not. We're in a new space, and the space is immensely complicated, and it is requiring all of us here, and I really appreciate this commitment here to speaking, to dialoguing, to talking this stuff through. We're in this space here where we've got to talk things through and to say to ourselves that it's way past rhetoric time now. The rhetoric is not enough. The rhetoric is not going to get us to deal with these immense challenges of being in this new mass higher education system, which we are now having to create, and all of us to be participating in building. All of us. We're having to build into this new system. And I can't emphasize to you how exciting that is. It's the most exciting time of our lives to be building a new system. And all of us must feel immensely privileged to be here. I know you go through difficulties. I know. I know, Prof. van Staden here. I know the challenges just of having to make a decision about what's happening at the gate, is immensely difficult. But the privilege, colleagues, the privilege of being here in the front seat as we are making this new system is one that you will live to be regaling your children with and for the rest of your lives. So thank you very much, colleagues.